in the midst of a presidential transition. The U.S. prides itself on that peaceful transition of power, but there's still some lingering questions after an election that some say is entirely too close for comfort. So let's go to the numbers now. First slide up, Trump's margin of victory. Now, we've all heard about this recount that's taking place right now, and in Michigan, it's in a little bit of limbo right now. They seem to be in a holding pattern, but the margin of victory for Trump was 0.3%. 0.3%. That accounts for, I think, about 10,000 votes in the context of Michigan, in that big old state. But that 0.3 meant all the difference in awarding Michigan 16 electoral college votes to this guy. Wisconsin is just at a 1% flat, which accounts for 10 electoral votes. Pennsylvania, a little bit closer to home, 1.2% of margin victory, which accounted for 20 electoral votes. And Florida, once again, is making election news with the popular vote versus the Electoral College, 1.3% the margin of victory, which counts for a hefty 29 electoral votes. Now, if you think about the fact that 36 votes, electoral votes, was really what did it for this guy, you can see why people are very attentive to these results of a recount and potential recount in other states. I've got one more slide to share with you. Hillary Clinton's margin of victory in Nevada was 2.2%. It's a good percent, but it only accounts for some 6 electoral votes in that big old state with not a lot of population. So that's just to look at some of the electoral math in an election that some people say is too close for comfort, but we'll get more into that in the A block.
Many could have predicted these court challenges coming. In fact, back in September on BK Live, we talked to an expert in information security.
The paper backup is the way to go. Some of these systems that have digital voting with no paper audit trail are totally insane. Yeah. Completely, it's just mind-blowingly ludicrous.
With those blunt words, we welcome back Alexander Urbelis, information security lawyer with the Blackstone Law Group. Alexander, thank you very much for coming back.
It's a pleasure to be here where blunt verbiage is apparently appreciated. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, we know votes without a paper backing system are going to be prone to reliability and security flaws. How does our country not have a standardized way to vote in 2016?
There's a very simple answer to that question, and the lack of standardization is by design. It comes from the Constitution itself, frankly. Each state is given discretion to handle its own voting processes, its mechanisms, and that's why we have this patchwork of systems from state to state. If you think about going back to the 18th century, our Constitution created this glorious political experiment whereby we have a federal government and a state government, and we are supposed to learn from the mistakes that one state makes. One state is supposed to learn from another state, and so forth and so on. But unfortunately, what we have here right now is a patchwork of electoral systems, and we're not learning from each other. We still have a lot of digital-only ballots that are out there that frustrate the electoral process. It's high time now, and I think with the recount in full swing, that this is given the due attention it deserves.
But couldn't one argue the sort of inverse of that, the fact that we don't have a standard, like, blanket way of voting makes it harder to steal an election? Because if there's only sort of one system, all you got to do is find out how to beat that one.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. In fact, I've actually argued this. If we were to switch, let's say, to a system where we disbanded the Electoral College, if we went to the interstate compact, which would be electoral college votes are awarded on the basis of the popular vote, it would be much more difficult to swing an election by hacking because we have this patchwork of systems. So in that sense, you could actually look at this morass, this patchwork of systems, as not necessarily a security flaw, but a security design, or a feature, so to speak. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Brian. It could actually make it more difficult. But the fact that we have no standardization in these processes as they stand right now makes it very problematic because it's an opaque system. And the manufacturers of the voting systems themselves have done this by design as well. What they are practicing is security through obscurity. And the fact that they have not been jumping up and down and screaming that, hey, we're going to release our code, we're going to show you that there is no vulnerability inherent to our voting systems, is suspect to me.
Right, and especially in these times of technological uncertainty. I mean, we had the DNC WikiLeaks, things like the Sony email hacks, government websites have been hacked, Ashley Madison, never heard of it. But why isn't there more public outcry or demand for a change in this?
I think you brought up a really good point here. All of those hacks, all of those data breaches over the last couple of years are a real clarion call here, that the country needs to wake up, companies need to wake up. We all need to be paying a lot more attention to information security. It's becoming a legal requirement. Here in New York, we've got a lot more regulations when it comes to financial services and information security. Right. So people are waking up. And you mentioned a lot of breaches that relate to the government. If you think about the OPM breach, the Office of Personnel Management breach, right. What was breached there was the SF-86 National Security Questionnaire information. So anybody who ever had a security clearance, top secret or higher, all of their personal data was breached. Now, you can reason by analogy, or you can reason, as we lawyers like to say, a fortiori, or by necessary implication. If OPM can be breached with such sensitive data, our SF-86 information, then breaching county clerks' computer networks and individual systems, that's like a hot knife going through warm butter.
Oh my gosh.
It makes that Target thing look like small potatoes.
Yes, exactly.
So going back to September, let us quote you to you again. Are we going to run this video now? Take a look at this.
And if that system is going to be compromised, it's not going to happen on election night. It's going to happen a year before election night, or 6 months, or 3 weeks, or 2 weeks. But more likely, it will happen way before.
So was this prophetic? Do you think that the small amount of states where this man had a victory margin that was so slim, do you think that there could have been some monkey business there?
You know, it's very hard to say. We don't know. And what's happening right now with all the lawsuits in these 5 states about a recount is about whether or not we have legal standing and we have the right to get an answer to that question. Because without an audit of these systems, or even just a small percentage of these systems, we are not going to know whether there was, in fact, any monkey business on any of these DRE systems where there are no backup paper ballots.
Are any of these states the ones that don't have the backup paper ballot, to your knowledge?
Yes. Pennsylvania, a lot of precincts, my understanding in Pennsylvania is that a lot of the precincts do not have paper backup systems there. Wow. And that is the subject, actually, of the lawsuit, the complaint that was filed in Pennsylvania by Jill Stein's lawyers. And they make a really interesting legal argument here where they combine information security requirements and make it an equal protection under the law argument. And I think this is really powerful because their complaint was very well drafted. They set out the security requirements. They even have some pretty wonderful quotable quotes that these systems are more hackable than an iPhone, and that's absolutely right. But it's very plain and it's very easily comprehensible to the judge to see this. The problem I think we're going to see, though, is that the recount was just halted in Michigan because of a lack of standing for Jill Stein, that she was not considered to be an aggrieved party, meaning that, you know,
she was like 1% later, you're not going to win this election, lady.
Exactly. You don't have standing to bring the legal claim. So if I were Trump's lawyers, and I'm not, I would make the same argument that carried the day in Michigan in Pennsylvania. And I believe that there's going to be a hearing in the next couple of days on that.
So you're a hacking expert. You know hackers. You mentioned before that hackers are hired by corporations. I mean, my question to you is, who do you think hacked this election if they did? And do you think that they'll come forward and talk about it ever? If it's, you know, if it happens.
Can I add one more thing to that? Does this like have a mark of a hacker, if you can say, just by these slim margins? Because they wouldn't go like all in, but just enough to like,
Well, it's interesting. So you guys have 2 very interesting questions here. The first one is essentially about, is anyone going to come forward? And the next one's about the margins. And will people come forward? This is sort of like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle with an adversary who's hiding some of the puzzle pieces. Because if we have people inside, if we have these putative whistleblowers that work for the voting machine manufacturers themselves, and they know about vulnerabilities in their source code that would make them vulnerable, they could come forward. But frankly, that's still not enough to prove that an election was hacked. Because knowing that the vulnerability exists is totally different than knowing that that vulnerability was in fact actually exploited. And if a third party, if a nation or some kind of very aggressive, well-funded adversary had an interest in monkeying with our election, Russia, China, who knows? I don't think that they would ever want to publicly acknowledge that because it would make their elections fair game. Now, to go to your question about the margins, what's very interesting to me about these margins is, as you mentioned, I started out in this game as a hacker, and I made some wrong turns in life.
You did?
I did.
That's another interview.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I started out as a hacker, I made some wrong turns in life, and I became a lawyer. But I think you have to think about this as a hacker. And if you were a hacker and you were trying to sway an election, a small margin of victory is going to trigger scrutiny, and it's going to trigger, in some places, an audit. So if you wanted to fly under the radar and you were swinging an election one way or another, you would probably want to have a margin of victory whereby scrutiny was not triggered.
Gotcha.
And here we have these very small margins. So it's a very unpopular position to take, a lot, especially in my social circles. But I think that the small margins are actually an indication that there wasn't monkeying around. Now, on the other hand, the small margins could indicate that some systems in some really vulnerable counties or precincts were compromised, and that could swing it. We look at those tiny little margins in places like Michigan, 0.3%. There, a couple of precincts could really swing that. So it could go either way, but I think overall, from a national perspective, these small margins actually indicate to me that it's less likely that there was a national compromise of our election system.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I want to spend another hour with you sometime, talk about the hacking more. But we appreciate your input on this. Thank you very much
for coming
back to BK Live.
Thanks.